Hey guys, welcome to another episode of About Ukraine, and in this video we're going to be talking about Propiska or registration in Ukraine. This term, de jure, or legally speaking, ties you to a property in Ukraine. And see this apartment behind me? That beautiful apartment or any other apartment, there's usually some person that is tied to that apartment, and do not confuse that with ownership. So let's get down to the bottom of what is a Propiska, because it's very important that you understand how it works and what it's used for if you're planning on moving here for short term or long term. So when you ask someone where is your home, there are many ways of answering that question. It could be like where you reside right now, it could be where you reside for the majority of your life, it could be where you were born. But legally speaking, and this is a remnant of the Soviet Union, there's only one way to answer that question, and that is your Propiska or registration. So number one, what exactly is a Propiska, and why do all foreigners and permanent residents of Ukraine and even Ukrainian citizens are talking about it, like it's something that they have to get? So Propiska and registration can be used interchangeably. However, there's another term that you should probably know about. It's called місце проживання, or place of residency, or address of residency. Basically, that means that this is a place that you currently reside at. It does not really have any legal definition behind it. It's just a place where you live. So Propiska is pretty complicated for people in the West to understand, because a Propiska sort of ties you to a property, but you do not necessarily have to be the owner of that property to get a Propiska. And by law, you're supposed to have this Propiska. So what is a Propiska? A Propiska ties you to a piece of real estate. You could tie it to a house, to an apartment. You can even tie it to a room. I mean, Propiskas exist in Ukraine for rooms. So basically, you're like your address is that like particular room in an apartment. It sounds kind of ridiculous, but that's how it is. So generally, Propiska guarantees you some level of basic social services like healthcare, driver's license, bank account. You may require a Propiska to get a job in many occupations in Ukraine as well. However, an absence of Propiska will not prevent you from getting medical care or health care in government institutions either. But in general, your Propiska address is basically used by the government to communicate with you. This is essentially what it is. And as a result of the Soviet remnant, Ukrainian government authorities do not really communicate with each other. They do not go by your mailing address, they do not go by your living address, your residency address or whatever. They go by your Propiska. And that's why it's so important for every citizen to have a Propiska address in the government's eyes. So how many types of Propiska are there? Well, there are two types of Propiskas. There's a permanent Propiska and there's a temporary Propiska. Temporary Propiskas are used for people who want to live here temporarily, and they must have a Propiska in place in order to get a temporary residence permit. And once your temporary residence permit expires, your Propiska automatically expires as well. So you don't really have to worry about like getting rid of your Propiska or like tying up loose ends when you leave the country. However, if you're a permanent resident or Ukrainian citizen, you must get a Propiska if you want a full set of rights and you want like basically a full set of social services available to you. So in order to get a Propiska, you have to understand that the owner of the real estate where you want to get a Propiska for has to be present with you. You go to a services office all over Ukraine, basically in the area where you're going to get a Propiska, and the owner has to come with you, and you basically fill out a bunch of forms and then you get that address tied to you. But why does the Propiska even matter? Well, the reason is the Ukrainian government bodies are quite archaic, and they simply do not know where you're located, how to reach you in case of an emergency, or if you to notify you of your fines or something like that. So the reason why you need a Propiska is because the government needs to reach you somehow, and the way they do that is they go by your Propiska address and they send you mail, basically. And if they can't do that, they basically cannot reach you in any way. However, this is changing really fast right now with apps and mobile apps, and now basically the government can send you notifications that way. So what is the history of a Propiska? So as I mentioned before, Propiska is a way to tie you to a piece of land. This originated in Russia even before the Soviet Union. Under the Tsars in Russia, it existed in some form. However, it was briefly repealed in 1917, just before the Russian Revolution. The Propiska system rapidly expanded as the Bolsheviks gained power in the Soviet Union. The Propiska, which tied you to a piece of land, was accompanied by an employment booklet, which was called the Trudovaya Knishka. So basically, together with this employment history and your address, this constituted a sort of an ID in the Soviet Union. So in 1925, all the inhabitants of all the rural regions were supposed to register with the government, and that was over 90% of the Soviet Union's population. But by 1935, this whole thing was extended to the city dwellers as well. Basically, that meant that you had to live where you worked, and any other situations was simply not possible, or theoretically or practically. So essentially, a propiska was a way to reinvent serfdom or slavery or indentured servitude, or however you want to call it. Basically, the master, or like usually one person, had a final say of where you could or could not work, where you could or could not live. And for peasants, it was especially difficult because it lasted all the way up to 1974. The only way for peasants to leave their land where they worked, where they toiled away, was to join the military academy, and again, you had to go through rounds and rounds of selections. You had to be vetted by the commissars. It was basically a long process, and only like a select few made it out. As a result, everyone was extremely immobile. Nobody could get out of the location where they lived, and it was generations upon generations who had to live like that. The final nail in the coffin was that in 1935 the law was codified that anybody had to ask permission to move, and this existed all the way until 1991. So if you're already confused, just hang on, because we're going to get into another document, and that is called the internal passport, or the ID. In the Western world, your ID is any government issued ID, like a health card, a driver's license more often than not. It's essentially your driver's license will be the ID that you're using everywhere, right? However, in the Soviet Union, nobody had cars, so a driver's license was out of the question. So in order to get around that, they created a system of internal passports, which is essentially an ID that is valid within the country where you're located. So essentially, you got the internal passport at the age of 16, and in there you had your photo glued in, and then on the second and the third page, you had your address actually written out and stamped by that official. That address was your propiska. So as you can see, people were really not mobile in this situation. Wherever people were born, they essentially lived their whole lives in that one place, and they ended up dying in the same place as well. What gained prevalence was women marrying up. Basically, a woman had to marry someone who lived in a nice city, like for example Kiev, Odessa, Kharkiv, like Moscow if you're in Russia. They had to marry a guy that was tied to that address in order to actually have the right to move to that new address. And the people that were living there typically had more money, they had higher professions, they were highly paid engineers, professors, lawyers. Almost universally speaking, it gained these women like a chance at a better life, the only chance. So you're wondering, what do you need in order to get a propiska here in Ukraine? Well, you're going to need a bunch of stuff. First of all, you're going to need your passport or permanent residency permit or temporary residency permit. After that, you're probably also going to get your INN or your identification number or your tax number. You're going to have to bring that number with you. And you're also going to have to bring with you the owner of the place where you want to get a propiska for. And the owner of the real estate is going to have to bring their passport and proof of ownership of that real estate. But I've saved the best for last. And if you're a male between the ages of 18 and 65, and the majority of people that are watching this channel do fall into this age group, I must admit, you'll have a chance of joining the army. And that's right, you're gonna have to do your civic duty and defend the motherland, Ukraine, from Russian aggression. But all jokes aside, in order to get a propiska, you're gonna have to be registered to your nearest military commissariat, which is your voenkomat. The voenkomat essentially posts you to the armed forces of Ukraine, and they'll give you a specific document which you must bring to the service center in order to get registered to an apartment. Anyway, we're going to talk about the military commissariat and getting posted to the armed forces of Ukraine in another video. So I hope you guys got some information about propiska and what you have to do to get it, and it's just another one of those hoops that you're going to have to jump through in order to make your stay in Ukraine possible. So guys, I hope you enjoyed this video, and like and subscribe. We're going to be talking about more subjects and going into more detail on things that will make your stay or your life in Ukraine more comfortable and with less surprises. Okay guys, see you in the next video.